We are not afraid to die if we can all be together. By Gordon Cook and Elanist. Notice this expression in the text in further meaning from the context. In July 1976, my wife Mary, my son Jonathan, 6, my daughter Suzanne, 7, and I set a sail from Plymouth, England to duplicate the round the world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. For the longest time, Mary and I, a 74-year-old businessman, had a dream of sailing in the wake of famous explorer, and for the past 16 years we had spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. Our boat, Wave Walker, a 23-meter, 30 tons wooden hull beauty, and had professionally built, and we had spent months fitting it out, testing it in the roughest weather we could find. The first leg of our planned 3-year, 1,05,000 kilometers journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. Therefore, before heading east, we took on 2 crewmen, American Larry Vigil and Swiss Herb Segler, to help us tackle one of the world's roughest sea, the Southern Indian Ocean. On our second day out of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. For the next few weeks, they blew continuously. Gales did not worry me, but the size of the waves was alarming, up to 15 meters as high as our mainmast. December 25 found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. Despite atrocious weather, we had a wonderful holiday complete with the Christmas tree. New Year's Day saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had to change soon, and it didn't change for the worse. At the dawn on January 2, the waves were gigantic. We were sailing with a small storm jib, and we were still making 8 knots. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see endless, enormous sea rolling towards us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the eyes. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jib and lashed a heavy mooring rope in the loop across the stern. Then we double lashed everything, went through our life rafting drill, attached lifeline, donned oilskins and life jackets, and waited. The first indication of impending disaster came up about 6 p.m. with an ominous silence. The wind dropped and the sky immediately grew dark. Then came a roaring roar and an enormous cloud towering aft of the sea. With horror, I realized that it was not cloud but a wave like no other I had ever seen. I appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of the other waves, with a frightful breaking crest. The roar increased to the thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave, and for the moment I thought we might ride over it. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. I accepted my approaching death, and I was losing consciousness. I felt quite peaceful. Unexpectedly, my head popped out of water a few meters away. Wave Walker was near capsizing, her mast almost horizontal. Then a wave hurled right upright. My lifeline jerked taut. I grabbed the guard rails and sailed through the air into Wave Walker's main boom. Subsequent waves tossed me around the deck like a rag doll. My left rib cracked, my mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow I found wheels, lined up the stern for the next wave and hung on. Water, water everywhere. I could feel the ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. Suddenly, the front hatch was thrown open and Mary appeared. "We are sinking," she screamed. "The deck are smashed. We are full of water." "Take the wheel," I shouted as I scrambled for the hatch. Larry and Herb was pumping like madmen. Broken timbers hung at crazy angles. The whole starboard side bulged inwards. Clothes, crockery, chart, tins, toys sloshed about in deep water. I half swam, half crawled into the children's cabin. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Yes," they answered from the upper deck bunk. "But my head hurt a bit," said Sue, pointing a big bump above her eye. I had no time to worry about the bumped heads. After finding a hammer and screws and canvas, I struggled back on the deck with the starboard side bashed open. We were taking water with each wave that broke over us. If I couldn't make some repairs, we could surely sink. Somehow I managed to stretch canvas and secure waterproof hatch cover across the gaping holes. Some water continued to stream below, but most of it was not being deflected over the side. More problems arose when our hand pumps started to block up with the debris floating around the cabin and the electric pump short-circuited. The water level rose threateningly. Back on deck, I found that our two spare hand pumps had been wrenched overboard, along with the forestay-sail, the jib, the dinghies, and the main anchor. Then I remember we had another electric pump under the chart room floor. I connected it out pipe and was thankful to find out that it worked. The night dragged on with the endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping, steering, and working the radio. We were getting no replies to our Madday's call, which was not surprisingly in the remote corner of the world. Sue's head had swollen alarmingly. She had two enormously black eyes. And now she showed up a deep cut on her arm. When I asked why she hadn't made more of an injury before this, she replied, "I didn't want to worry you when you were trying to save us all." By morning on January 3, the pump had the water level sufficiently under control for us to just take 2 hours rest in rotation. But we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the waterline, and on checking I found that nearly all the boat main frames were smashed down to the keel. In fact, there was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull except a few cupboard partitions. We had survived for 15 hours since the wave hit, but Wave Walker wouldn't hold together long enough for us to reach Australia. I checked our chart and calculated there were two small islands a few hundred kilometers to the east. One of them, Isle Amsterdam, Isle Amsterdam was French scientific base. Our only hope was to reach the pinpricks in the vast ocean. But unless the wind sea abated so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. The great wave had put an auxiliary engine out of the action. On Jan 4th, after 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the few centimeters of water. Now we had only to keep pace with the water still coming in. We could not set any sail on the mainmast. Pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull apart. So we hoisted the storm jeep and headed for where I thought the two islands were. Mary found some corned beef, cracker biscuits, and we ate our first meal in almost 2 days. But our respite was short lived. At 4 pm, black clouds began building up behind us. Within the hour, the wind was back to 40 knots and sea were getting higher. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the night, and by dawn on Jan 5, our situation was again desperate. When I went in to the comfort the children. John asked, "Daddy, are we going to die?" I tried to assure him that we could make it, but Daddy, he went on, "We aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together. You and Mummy, Sue and I." I could find no words and with which to respond, but I left the children's cabin determined to fight the sea with everything I had. To protect the weekend starboard side, I decided to heave to the heave to with the undamaged port hull facing the oncoming waves using a improvised sea anchor on heavy nylon rope and 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. That evening, Mary and I sat together holding hands as the motion of the ship brought more and more water into the broken planks. We both felt the end was very near, but Wave Walker rode out of the storm, and by the morning of January 6th, with the wind easing, I tried to get a reading on the sextant. Back in the chat room, I work on wind speeds, change of the course, drift and current in an effort to calculate our position. The best I could determine was that we were somewhere in 150,000 kilometers of ocean looking for a 65-kilometer wide island. While I was thinking, sure, moving painfully joined me. The left side of her head was now very swollen and her blackened eyes narrowed to slit. She gave me a card she had made. On the front, she had drawn caricature of Mary and me with the words, "Here are some funny people." Did they make you laugh? I laugh a lot as well. Inside was a message. Oh, how I love you both. So this card is to say thank you and let's hope for the best. Somehow we had to make it. I checked and rechecked my calculation. We had lost our main compass. I was using a spare which had not been corrected for magnetic variations. I made an allowance for his. Uh, I made an allowance for this and another estimate of our influence of westerly currents which flow through the part of the Indian Ocean. About 2 p.m. I went on deck and as I carried Larry. I went on deck and asked Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. If we were lucky, I told him with the conviction I did not feel but could expect to see the island at about 5 p.m. Then we have a heavy heart. I went below, climbed on my bunk, and amazingly dozed off. When I woke it was 6 p.m. When I woke it was 6 p.m. and growing dark. I knew we must have missed island, and with the sail we had left, we couldn't hope to beat back into westernly winds. winds. At the moment, a tussle hat appearing by my bunk. Can I have a hug? Jonathan asked. She was right behind me. Why am I getting a hug now? I asked. Because you are the best daddy in the whole world, and best captain, my son replied. Not today, John, I am afraid. Why, you must be, said Sue in the matter of fact voice. You found the island. What? I shouted. It's out there in front of us. They chorused, a big as a battleship. I rushed on the deck and gazed with relief at the stark outline of island Amsterdam. I was only a bleak piece of volcanic rock. It was only a bleak piece of volcanic rock with little vegetation, the most beautiful island in the world. We anchored offshore for the night, and the next morning at 28 inhabitants of island, we anchored offshore for the night, and the next morning all 20 inhabitants of the island cheered as they helped us ashore. With land under feet again, my thoughts were full of Larry and Herbie. Cheerful and optimistic under the distress, stress, and all of Mary, who stayed all the way for all those crucial hours. Most of all, I thought of a 7-year-old girl who did not want us to worry about a head injury, which subsequently took 6 minor operations to remove a recurring blood clot between skin and skull, and of 6-year-old boy who was not afraid to die.